The dust rose in small clouds behind Elizabeth's worn boots as she stumbled across the endless prairie. Her once fine calico dress, now torn at the hem and stained with sweat, clung to her trembling form. 3 days. 3 days since she'd fled from the suffocating walls of Cedar Ridge, leaving behind everything she'd ever known. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Kansas grasslands, turning the horizon into a shimmering line between earth and sky. Elizabeth's throat burned with thirst, her water flask long empty. But she dared not stop, dared not look back. Somewhere behind her, she knew. Samuel Garrett and his men were searching. Samuel Garrett. Even thinking his name made her stomach churn. The wealthy rancher her father had promised her to, with his cold gray eyes and hands that grabbed too hard, smiled too wide when no one was watching. Her father saw only the cattle, the land, the money that would save their failing general store. He didn't see the darkness that lurked beneath Garrett's respectable facade. "You're lucky, girl," her father had said, counting the bride price like 30 pieces of silver. 23 and still untouched. Most men wouldn't want damaged goods. Untouched. The word echoed in Elizabeth's mind as she pressed forward through the tall grass. Her innocence had become a commodity, something to be bartered and sold. In Boston, where she'd spent her childhood before her family's westward venture, young ladies spoke in hushed tones about marriage, about wedding nights, about duties to husbands. But here on the frontier, such delicate matters became harsh transactions. The memory of 2 nights ago still made her hands shake. Garrett had cornered her behind her father's store, whiskey heavy on his breath. "Soon you'll be mine, sweet Elizabeth," he'd whispered, his fingers tracing her jaw. "Every inch of you, and I do mean every inch." That night, she'd packed nothing but bread, dried meat, and water. She'd taken her mother's silver locket, the only thing of value truly hers, and slipped away under a moonless sky. Better to die free on the prairie than live caged in Garrett's ranch. But the prairie was vast and unforgiving. The bread was gone, devoured on the first day. The meat had lasted until noon yesterday. And the water. Elizabeth licked her cracked lips, tasting blood. She'd thought she could reach Fort Lincoln, maybe find work as a seamstress or washwoman. But she'd underestimated the distance, overestimated her own strength, city-bred and sheltered. She knew nothing of survival in this harsh land. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber. And still she saw nothing but endless waves of grass. A sound made her freeze, hoofbeats, distant but growing closer. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They'd found her. Garrett had found her. Elizabeth looked around desperately. Nowhere to hide in this open expanse, nowhere to run that horses couldn't easily overtake. The hoofbeats multiplied. Not one horse, but several. Elizabeth's legs, already weak from exhaustion, nearly gave out. She forced herself to keep moving, though she knew it was futile. What would Garrett do when he caught her? The thought sent ice through her veins despite the heat. Ahead, the land dipped into a shallow ravine carved by some long, dry stream. Elizabeth half ran, half fell down the slope, her boots slipping on loose stones. If she could just find somewhere to hide, some outcropping or cave. But as she reached the bottom, she realized her mistake. The ravine offered no shelter, only a clearer view of her approaching fate. The walls were too steep to climb quickly, trapping her like a rabbit in a snare. The hoofbeats thundered closer. Elizabeth pressed herself against the ravine wall, fingers clutching at the dirt as if she could melt into the earth itself. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Stay pure, my darling. Save yourself for a man who truly loves you." Easy words to say in a Boston parlor. Harder to honor when purity became a prize men felt entitled to claim. Dust clouds appeared at the ravine's edge. Elizabeth closed her eyes, waiting for Garrett's mocking laugh, for rough hands to drag her back to Cedar Ridge. Instead, she heard nothing. The hoofbeats had stopped. Slowly, she opened her eyes and looked up. The silhouette against the setting sun wasn't Garrett. The rider sat tall and still on a painted horse, long hair flowing free in the wind. As her eyes adjusted, Elizabeth's breath caught. An Indian. Her mind raced with every terrifying story she'd heard in Cedar Ridge. Savage, heathen, woman-stealer. The newspapers were full of lurid tales about white women captured by Indians, subjected to unspeakable fates. She'd fled one danger only to stumble into another, but wait. As the rider guided his horse down into the ravine with fluid grace, Elizabeth noticed something that didn't fit the frightening stories. His approach was careful, almost cautious. He kept his hands visible, away from the rifle slung across his back. This was no raiding party, just one man, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who belonged to this land in a way she never could. Elizabeth pressed harder against the wall, trying to become invisible. But there was nowhere to go. The rider stopped his horse a respectful distance away, studying her with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. Her torn dress, her sunburned face, the desperate fear in her expression. When he dismounted, Elizabeth flinched, but he moved slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 summers, with the kind of stillness that spoke of strength held in check. He said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice low and measured. When she didn't respond, only stared with wide eyes, he tried again. This time, she caught a word she recognized. Water? Such a simple word, but it broke something inside her. The tears came then, born of exhaustion and fear and desperate thirst. She nodded, unable to speak past the dust in her throat. The Indian. Lakota, she thought, remembering talk from the town, pulled a water skin from his horse and approached slowly. He stopped just out of arm's reach and set the water on a flat rock between them, then stepped back. Elizabeth's pride warred with her need, but thirst won. She grabbed the skin with shaking hands and drank deeply, the cool water like life itself flowing down her parched throat. When she finally lowered it, gasping, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. He nodded once, then surprised her by speaking in accented but clear English. "You run from someone." It wasn't a question. Elizabeth's fingers tightened on the water skin. Should she lie? But what was the point? Her situation was obvious. "Yes," she admitted. "White men coming," he said, tilting his head back the way she'd come. "Many horses. 2 hours, maybe less." Panic flared fresh in Elizabeth's chest. "I can't go back. I won't go back." The Lakota studied her for a long moment. Elizabeth found herself holding her breath, waiting for his judgment. Would he leave her here for Garrett to find? Take her himself? The stories said Indians prized white women as captives, though for what purpose the tellers always left a horrified imagination. But when he finally spoke, his words surprised her again. "You cannot survive alone. This land." He gestured at the vast prairie. "It does not forgive." "I know," Elizabeth said quietly. "But there are worse things than dying free." Something shifted in his expression at that. He looked at her more closely, seeing perhaps not just a foolish white woman, but someone who understood the price of freedom. "My people's land is near," he said finally. "You would be safe there." Elizabeth's heart raced. Go willingly into Indian territory. Everything she'd been taught screamed against it. But what choice did she have? Stay here and be dragged back to Garrett, or trust this stranger whose eyes held no cruelty? "Why would you help me?" she asked. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My sister once ran from a man who would harm her. Someone helped her find safety." He paused, then added, "And you remind me, we know what it is to have others try to cage us." In that moment, Elizabeth understood. Whatever differences lay between them, they shared this, the knowledge of what it meant to be seen as property, to have others decide your fate. She looked back toward Cedar Ridge, toward the life that wanted to claim her. Then she looked at the Lakota warrior, waiting patiently for her decision. "I don't even know your name," she said softly. "Joseph," he replied, and she wondered if it was his real name or one adopted for dealing with whites. "My father was French trader, my mother. Lakota. I walk between worlds." Between worlds. Elizabeth understood that too. Caught between her Boston upbringing and frontier realities. Between maidenhood and the harsh bargains men wanted to make with her body. The sound of distant hooves made the decision for her. Garrett was coming. Time had run out. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'll come with you." Joseph nodded and moved to his horse with swift purpose. He mounted, then extended his hand down to her. Elizabeth hesitated only a moment before taking it, allowing him to pull her up behind him. As they rode from the ravine, Elizabeth cast one last look back. Dust clouds marked her pursuer's approach. In minutes, Garrett would find the ravine empty, her trail vanishing into the vast grassland. She wrapped her arms around Joseph's waist, feeling the solid warmth of another human being for the first time in days. He guided the painted horse with expert skill, choosing paths through the grass that seemed invisible to her eyes. "Thank you," she said again, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Save your thanks." Joseph replied, "The journey is long, and my people, not all will welcome you, but you will be safe. This I promise." As they rode toward the setting sun, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. Protected. Not owned, not bargained for, but genuinely protected. It was a foreign feeling, as vast and strange as the prairie itself. Behind them, the ravine disappeared into gathering darkness, taking with it the cage others had built for her. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger perhaps, but also possibility. For now, that was enough. The painted horse carried them swiftly across the darkening plain, toward whatever fate awaited in the lands of the Lakota. The painted horse slowed as they crested a low hill, and Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. The setting sun painted the grasslands in shades of crimson and gold, transforming the harsh prairie into something almost beautiful. Joseph guided the horse to a halt near a cluster of cottonwood trees, their leaves whispering secrets in the evening breeze. "We rest here," he said, dismounting with fluid grace before helping her down. Elizabeth's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, muscles cramped from the long ride. Joseph steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his touch brief and impersonal. As soon as she found her balance, he stepped back, maintaining that careful distance. Elizabeth watched him tend to his horse, removing the saddle and checking the animal's hooves with practiced care. Everything about him spoke of competence, of belonging to this wild land in a way she never could. While he worked, Elizabeth studied him more closely in the dying light. His hair, black as a moonless night, fell past his shoulders, held back from his face by a beaded band. He wore a mixture of native and white clothing, leather leggings and moccasins, but also a cotton shirt, worn soft with age. Around his neck hung a small medicine bag alongside what looked like a saint's medal, more evidence of the two worlds he straddled. His features held that same duality. The high cheekbones and bronze skin spoke of his Lakota blood, but there was something in the shape of his nose, the set of his mouth, that whispered of French ancestry. When he turned to gather firewood, she noticed scars across his back, visible through the thin shirt. Old wounds that spoke of violence survived. "Don't wander," he said without looking at her. "Prairie wolves hunt at dusk." Elizabeth shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Every shadow seemed to hold new dangers. She missed the solid walls of houses, the illusion of safety they provided. Out here, under the vast dome of sky, she felt exposed as a rabbit in an open field. Joseph built a small fire with efficiency, the flames soon crackling cheerfully against the gathering darkness. He pulled supplies from his saddlebags: dried meat, flatbread, more water. He divided the food carefully, setting Elizabeth's portion on a clean cloth near her before retreating to the other side of the fire. "Eat slow," he advised. "Your stomach is empty too long." Elizabeth took small bites, forcing herself to chew thoroughly despite her hunger. The meat was tough and salty, the bread hard, but it was the best meal she'd had in days. As she ate, she watched Joseph across the flames. He stared out into the darkness, alert even in rest, one hand never far from the rifle beside him. "How did you know?" she asked finally. That I was running from someone. He glanced at her, firelight dancing in his dark eyes. White women don't walk alone on the prairie, not by choice. He paused, then added, And your eyes? They have the look of a trapped animal that finally finds the cage door open. Elizabeth looked down at her hands, surprised to find tears threatening. Is it that obvious? To one who knows what to see. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the prairie night come alive around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Closer. Insects chirped their evening songs. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the emerging stars. Why were you in that ravine? Elizabeth asked. It seems fortunate. Not fortune. Purpose. Joseph fed another stick to the fire. I was tracking buffalo sign when I saw dust clouds from the north. Curious who rides so hard. Then I find you. He studied her across the flames. The men who chase you, they will not stop. Elizabeth thought of Garrett's possessive fury, of the bride price already paid. No, the man I was promised to, he doesn't like losing what he considers his. You are not willing. My opinion wasn't considered relevant. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Joseph nodded slowly. Among my people, a woman cannot be forced to marry. She must accept the suitor's gifts, welcome him to her teepee. Without her consent, there is no marriage. How civilized, Elizabeth murmured, then flushed at the irony. All her life, she'd been taught that Indians were the savages, yet here was more consideration than her own father had shown. Tell me, Joseph said quietly. This man who would claim you, what kind of man is he? Elizabeth stared into the fire, remembering Garrett's heavy hands, his whiskey breath, the way he looked at her like a prize mare to be broken. Wealthy, powerful. He owns the largest ranch in 3 counties. My father owed him money, and I became part of the payment. Ah. The single syllable held understanding. Among whites, women are property, yes, like horses or land? We're supposed to be more than that, Elizabeth said softly. But in practice, yes, especially on the frontier, especially when there's money involved. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You have courage. Many would not run, would accept their fate. Or perhaps I'm simply foolish. Elizabeth touched her mother's locket, drawing comfort from the familiar weight. I don't know anything about surviving out here. If you hadn't found me, but I did find you. His voice held quiet certainty. Perhaps the spirits guided my path today. Elizabeth looked up at him, startled by the suggestion of divine intervention. In the firelight, his face held an otherworldly quality, planes and shadows shifting with the dancing flames. For a moment, she could almost believe in fate, in spirits that guided lost souls to safety. Your spirits protect white women? She asked, half joking. The spirits see beyond skin. Joseph replied seriously. They see the heart, and a heart that chooses dangerous freedom over comfortable chains. This is worth protecting. His words sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. When was the last time anyone had seen her as more than a body to be bartered, a possession to be claimed? Even her father had viewed her primarily as an asset, pretty enough to secure a good marriage and solve his debts. You said your people might not welcome me, Elizabeth said. Why? Joseph's expression darkened. There has been much blood between our peoples. The blue coats come, make treaties, break them, take our land, kill our buffalo. Some of my people would see only an enemy in your white skin. And you? What do you see? He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense but not uncomfortable. I see a woman who knows what it means to have others try to steal her freedom. This is something my people understand very well. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of rain. Joseph looked to the sky, reading signs Elizabeth couldn't perceive. Storm coming. We need shelter. He stood and kicked dirt over the fire, reducing it to embers. Elizabeth helped gather their few supplies, marveling at how quickly he could make a camp disappear. Soon, it was as if they'd never been there at all. Joseph led his horse to a natural depression in the hillside, partially sheltered by an overhang of rock and the spreading cottonwood branches. He strung a piece of canvas between the trees, creating a simple lean-to that would block the worst of wind and rain. "You sleep here," he said, spreading a buffalo hide on the ground beneath the shelter. "I keep watch. You need rest too," Elizabeth protested. "I am used to little sleep." "You are not." His tone brooked no argument. As Elizabeth settled onto the buffalo hide, surprised by its warmth and softness, the first drops of rain began to fall. Joseph positioned himself at the shelter's entrance, rifle across his knees, his back to her as he watched the night. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Elizabeth pulled her thin shawl closer. Despite her exhaustion, sleep felt impossible. Every sound made her start. Was it Garrett's men, prairie wolves, some other danger she couldn't even imagine? "You are safe," Joseph said quietly, not turning around. "I gave my word. Among the Lakota, this is sacred." "Why?" Elizabeth asked into the darkness. "Why promise to protect someone you don't even know?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, when I was young, maybe 12 summers, soldiers came to our camp. They were drunk, looking for women. My mother hid my sister, but they found her. Would have taken her." His voice held old pain. "A white man stopped them, a priest, traveling to build a mission. He stood between the soldiers and my sister, refused to move. They beat him badly, but he would not step aside. Said God required him to protect innocents." Elizabeth's throat tightened. "What happened?" "The soldiers left. The priest lived, though he carried scars always. My sister was safe, later, when the priest was well. My mother asked him why he risked his life for an Indian girl. He said—" Joseph paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He said God does not see race or tribe when innocence is threatened. Only the duty of the strong to protect those who cannot protect themselves." "He sounds like a good man." He taught me English. Taught me that not all whites are the same, just as not all Indians are the same. When he died, I was with him. His last words were to remember that protection of the innocent is sacred work, no matter who needs protecting. Elizabeth blinked back tears. "And so you protected me." "The circle continues," Joseph said simply. "Someday, you will protect another. This is how the world becomes better, one choice at a time." Lightning flashed, illuminating the prairie in stark relief. In that brief moment, Elizabeth saw Joseph's profile, strong and watchful, standing guard between her and all the dangers of the night. The sight filled her with an unfamiliar feeling, not the suffocating possession Garrett offered, but something cleaner, freely given. "Joseph," she said softly, "thank you, not just for saving me, but for seeing me as worth saving." He turned slightly, just enough for her to see the edge of his face in the darkness. "Rest now, Elizabeth. Tomorrow brings its own challenges." She lay back on the buffalo hide, listening to the rain pattering on the canvas above. Despite the storm, despite the uncertain future, she felt safer than she had in months. Joseph's steady presence at the shelter's entrance was like a wall between her and the world's cruelties. As sleep finally began to claim her, Elizabeth heard him singing softly in Lakota, a low, melodious chant that seemed to blend with the storm itself. She didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. A prayer of protection, a warrior's promise to stand guard through the night. For the first time since her mother's death, Elizabeth fell asleep feeling watched over, protected not because someone owned her, but because someone had chosen to stand between her and harm. In the morning, she would face whatever came next, but for tonight, she was safe. The storm raged on, but Elizabeth slept peacefully, trusting in the promise of a Lakota warrior who understood that sometimes the greatest act of courage was simply to guard another's rest. Elizabeth woke to the smell of coffee and the soft light of dawn filtering through the cottonwood leaves. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Where were the walls of her room? The familiar quilt her mother had sewn. Then memory returned. The flight from Cedar Ridge. The Lakota warrior. The storm. Joseph crouched by a small fire. A battered tin pot balanced on the coals. He'd changed position during the night but showed no signs of fatigue. His rifle lay within easy reach, and his eyes constantly scanned the horizon even as he tended the fire. "Good morning," Elizabeth said softly, sitting up and trying to smooth her tangled hair. He glanced at her, nodding once. "The storm passed. Your pursuers will have difficulty tracking in the mud." He poured coffee into a tin cup, passing it to her. "Drink. We have far to travel today." The coffee was strong and bitter, but Elizabeth savored its warmth. As she sipped, she studied Joseph in the morning light. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years living close to the land, every gesture purposeful. When he handed her more of the dried meat and flatbread, his fingers briefly brushed hers. He pulled back immediately, that careful distance maintained. "How far to your people?" she asked. "By sunset, if we ride steady." He began breaking camp with the same efficiency he'd shown the night before. "But first, we must speak of important things." Elizabeth's stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" Joseph paused in his work, choosing his words carefully. "Among my people, a woman's virtue is sacred. A maiden is protected by her family, by custom, by honor. But you have no family among us, no one to stand for you." Heat crept up Elizabeth's neck. Even here, in the wilderness, her body remained a topic of concern, something to be guarded or claimed. "I see." "No," Joseph said firmly. "I think you do not see." He moved to sit across from her, maintaining that respectful distance but meeting her eyes directly. "I speak of protection, not possession. Among the Lakota, to force a woman is the greatest dishonor. A man who does this is cast out, considered less than human. But you must understand, as an outsider, without family, some might not extend you this protection." "And so?" Elizabeth asked, chin lifting despite her fear. "And so I make you this vow." Joseph's voice took on a formal quality, as if speaking words of ritual. "Before the spirits and the four directions, I pledge myself as your protector. Your honor is my honor. Your safety is my duty. Any who would harm you must first face me." The weight of his words settled over Elizabeth like a blanket. "Why would you bind yourself this way? You barely know me." "I know enough." His dark eyes held steady on hers. "I know you chose danger over dishonor. I know you trust me enough to sleep while I keep watch. And I know the spirits brought us together for a purpose. I've never had anyone." Elizabeth struggled to find words for the feeling expanding in her chest. "In my world, protection always comes with a price. What do you expect in return?" Joseph's expression softened slightly. "You think like a white woman, of bargains and trades. This is not business. This is duty. The only thing I ask is that you trust me, even when my people's ways seem strange. Can you do this?" Elizabeth thought of Cedar Ridge, of her father counting coins while selling her future, of Garrett's grasping hands and possessive eyes. Then she looked at Joseph, who offered protection with no demands, safety with no chains. "Yes," she whispered. "I can trust you." He nodded, satisfied. "Then we understand each other. Come, we must ride." As they prepared to leave, Elizabeth found herself watching Joseph with new eyes. The way he checked the horse's legs for injury, the careful way he secured their supplies, the constant vigilance even in small movements. All of it spoke of a man who took his responsibilities seriously. "Here," he said, pulling something from his saddlebag. It was a length of soft doe skin, worked until it was supple as silk. "Wrap this around your head and face. The sun will burn you badly otherwise." Elizabeth took the offering, surprised by its softness. As she arranged it to protect her fair skin, she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she asked. "You do not complain," he observed. "Many white women would be crying by now, demanding to be taken to a town, to their own kind." "My own kind?" Elizabeth let out a bitter laugh. "My own kind were ready to sell me like cattle, at least with you. I know where I stand." They mounted the painted horse, Elizabeth behind Joseph as before. As they rode, She noticed how he chose their path carefully, avoiding ridge lines where they might be silhouetted against the sky, keeping to low ground where the tall grass provided cover. "Tell me about your people," Elizabeth said as the morning wore on, "so I won't offend through ignorance." Joseph considered. "We are the Lakota. Though whites call us Sioux, my band is small, maybe 40 lodges. We follow the buffalo, live free on the grasslands as our ancestors did, but it becomes harder each year. The white settlers come like a flood. The buffalo grow fewer. The bluecoats build more forts." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said softly, knowing how inadequate the words were. "You did not steal our land," Joseph replied. "You run from the same men who would cage us. Perhaps this makes us allies. In a way." They rode in companionable silence for a time. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, an ocean of grass beneath an azure sky. Elizabeth had never imagined the world could be so vast, so empty of human structures. It was terrifying and exhilarating at once. Near midday, Joseph suddenly stiffened. He guided the horse to a stop, head tilted as if listening to something Elizabeth couldn't hear. "What is it?" she whispered. "Horses, many of them." He scanned the horizon, then pointed to a dust cloud rising in the east. "There, perhaps 2 miles." Elizabeth's heart raced. "Garrett? Perhaps, or buffalo hunters, or soldiers. None would be good for us." He wheeled the horse toward a dry creek bed lined with scrub brush. "We hide." They dismounted quickly, Joseph leading the horse down into the natural depression. He positioned them behind a tangle of sage and tumbleweeds, then lay flat, pulling Elizabeth down beside him. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, coiled like a spring ready to release. The hoofbeats grew louder. Elizabeth pressed herself against the earth, hardly daring to breathe. Beside her, Joseph had become utterly still, a part of the landscape itself. His hand rested on his rifle, but he made no move to ready it. Through the brush, Elizabeth caught glimpses of the riders as they passed, a dozen men, heavily armed, led by a figure she recognized with sickening certainty. Samuel Garrett rode at the front, his face set in lines of cruel determination. Behind him rode his ranch hands, hard men who'd do whatever their boss commanded. One of them was saying, "Could be anywhere by now. Boss, that storm washed out any tracks. She's out here." Garrett snarled. "That little witch thinks she can make a fool of me? I paid good money for her. She's mine by rights." "What if she's dead?" another man suggested. "Prairie's dangerous for a woman alone." "Then I'll find her body," Garrett said coldly. "Either way, she's coming back with me." They passed within 50 yards of the creek bed. Elizabeth held her breath, feeling Joseph's steady presence beside her. One of the horses snorted and tossed its head, causing its rider to look in their direction. For one heart-stopping moment, Elizabeth thought they'd been discovered, but the man simply spurred his horse forward, following the others. The sound of hoofbeats gradually faded into the distance. They lay still for long minutes after the riders had gone. Finally, Joseph stirred, raising his head cautiously to scan the horizon. "They're gone," he said quietly, "but they search in a pattern. They will be back." Elizabeth realized she was trembling. The reality of Garrett's pursuit, the determination in his voice, the casual way he spoke of her as property, it all crashed over her like a cold wave. "Hey," Joseph said softly, his hand touching her shoulder briefly. "You're safe. I won't let him take you." "You heard him," Elizabeth whispered. "He won't stop. He'll keep hunting until he finds me." "Then he will hunt forever," Joseph said with quiet certainty. "Once you are among my people, adopted into the tribe, you become invisible to white law. Their papers, their ownership, mean nothing on Lakota land." "Adopted?" Elizabeth looked at him in surprise. "If the grandmothers accept you, yes, you would become Lakota in the eyes of our people, protected by our laws, our customs." He studied her face. "But this means leaving your old life completely behind. No going back to white settlements, no contact with your former world. Could you accept this?" Elizabeth thought of Cedar Ridge, of her father who'd sold her, of the narrow life that awaited her as Garrett's wife. Then she thought of the vast prairie, of Joseph's steady protection, of a chance to be more than property. "There's nothing for me to go back to," she said firmly. "My old life ended the night I ran. Whatever comes next has to be better than what I left behind." Joseph nodded, approval in his dark eyes. "You have a warrior's spirit, Elizabeth. This will serve you well among the Lakota." As they prepared to continue their journey, Elizabeth felt something shift inside her. The fear remained, but alongside it grew a spark of hope. She was riding toward an uncertain future. Yes, but it was a future she had chosen, and she was not riding alone. "Joseph," she said as they mounted the horse again, "your vow to protect me, I want you to know I don't take it lightly. I understand the weight of what you've promised." "Good," he replied simply. "Understanding makes the burden lighter for both of us." As they rode on across the endless prairie, Elizabeth realized that for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as a commodity or a conquest, but as a person worthy of protection and respect. It was a foreign feeling, as vast and wild as the land around them. The sun climbed higher, and they rode on toward Joseph's people, toward a new life Elizabeth could barely imagine. Behind them, Garrett and his men searched in vain, chasing shadows across the grassland. But Elizabeth no longer looked back. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, on the promise of freedom that lay beyond. The next 3 days blurred together in a rhythm of survival that was foreign to Elizabeth's civilized upbringing. Each dawn found them moving across the prairie, Joseph teaching her the skills she needed to survive in this unforgiving land. Her soft hands blistered from gathering buffalo chips for fuel. Her fair skin burned despite the protective doe skin, and her muscles ached from the constant riding. But she didn't complain. Not when Joseph showed her how to find water by watching the flight patterns of birds. Not when he taught her to recognize which plants could ease hunger and which would poison. Not even when they had to cross a river swollen with spring runoff, the current tugging at the horse's legs while she clung to Joseph's waist, terrified of being swept away. "You're stronger than you know," he told her that evening as she wrung out her sodden skirts. "Most white women would have begged to turn back by now. Most white women haven't had to choose between freedom and slavery," Elizabeth replied, her voice steady despite her chattering teeth. Joseph built their fire higher that night, concerned about the chill that had settled into her bones after the river crossing. He even broke his usual distance, sitting closer to share the warmth of a buffalo robe. "Tell me about your mother," he said unexpectedly. "You touch her locket when you need strength." Elizabeth's hand went unconsciously to the silver oval at her throat. "She died 2 years ago. Lung fever. She was everything my father isn't. Kind, thoughtful, saw people for who they were rather than what they could provide." She smiled sadly. "She would have liked you. I think she always said true honor had nothing to do with blood or birth, only with choices." A wise woman. Joseph fed another branch to the fire. "My mother would say similar things. She had to be strong, raising mixed-blood children. The whites scorned us for our Indian blood. Some Lakota rejected us for our white blood. She taught us to walk between worlds with dignity." "Is that why you're helping me? Because you understand what it's like to not fully belong anywhere?" Joseph considered this, perhaps, or perhaps because the spirits whisper that our paths were meant to cross. He glanced at her. "Do you believe in fate, Elizabeth?" "I didn't," she admitted. "But now, how else do I explain you finding me at the exact moment I needed help? How do I explain feeling safer with a stranger than I ever did with my own family?" The next morning brought new challenges. As they picked their way through a rocky gulch, Joseph suddenly held up his hand for silence. Elizabeth had learned to trust his instincts implicitly. She froze, scanning the landscape for danger. "Bear," he whispered, pointing to fresh tracks in the mud. "Mother with cubs. Very dangerous." They had to backtrack 2 miles to find another route, adding hours to their journey. As they circled around, Elizabeth caught a glimpse of the massive grizzly in the distance. 2 cubs tumbling in the grass nearby. The sight filled her with awe and terror in equal measure. "Everything here can kill you," she murmured. "Yes," Joseph agreed. "But if you respect the land, learn its ways, it will also feed you, shelter you, teach you. The prairie is harsh but honest. It does not lie or betray. Unlike men." That afternoon, they encountered a small herd of buffalo. Joseph brought the horse to a stop, letting Elizabeth take in the magnificent sight. The massive beasts grazed peacefully, their dark bodies like islands in the sea of grass. "Once herds so large they took days to pass," Joseph said, sadness threading his voice. "Now, smaller each year. The white hunters kill for sport, leave the meat to rot, take only tongues and hides." "That's horrible," Elizabeth said, genuinely appalled. "Such waste. This is the difference." Joseph said, "My people kill what we need. Use every part. Give thanks to the spirit of the buffalo. Whites kill for money, for entertainment. They do not understand that when the buffalo die, we die too." As they skirted the herd, one massive bull raised his head, watching them with ancient eyes. For a moment, Elizabeth felt the weight of that gaze, as if the animal was taking her measure. Then it snorted and returned to grazing, dismissing them as no threat. On the 4th day, disaster nearly struck. They were crossing a stretch of broken country, full of ravines and hidden obstacles, when the horse stumbled. Elizabeth, caught off guard, lost her grip and tumbled to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly. Joseph was beside her instantly, his hands gentle but efficient as he examined her injury. "Not broken," he determined, "but badly twisted. You cannot walk on it." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth gasped, tears of pain and frustration pricking her eyes. "I'm slowing you down." "No apologies," Joseph said firmly. "Injuries happen. We adapt." He fashioned a bandage from strips of cloth, binding her ankle tightly. Then, without asking permission, he lifted her in his arms and placed her back on the horse. "You ride alone now. I will walk and lead. But that will take so much longer. Then it takes longer." His tone brooked no argument. "I gave my word to protect you. That includes protecting you from your own stubborn pride." For the rest of that day and into the next, Joseph walked beside the horse, leading it carefully over the rough terrain. Elizabeth watched him with growing wonder. His endurance seemed endless, his patience unlimited. When she needed water, he provided it. When the pain made her whimper, he found willow bark for her to chew, easing the discomfort. "Why don't you resent me?" she asked as they made camp that night. "I'm a burden now, slowing your journey, eating your food." Joseph looked at her across the fire, his expression thoughtful. "Among my people, strength is not just in the body. You endure pain without complaint. You trust when I lead into unknown places. You learn what I teach with eager mind. This is also strength." He paused. "And you have not once acted as if I am less than you because of my blood." "Do you know how rare that is?" Elizabeth felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "You've shown me more honor and kindness than any white man ever has. If anyone is less than, it isn't you." Something shifted in Joseph's eyes at her words, a warmth that made her breath catch. But he simply nodded and returned to preparing their evening meal. That night, a storm threatened again. Joseph constructed a more elaborate shelter, weaving branches together with practiced skill. As the first drops fell, he carried Elizabeth inside, settling her on a bed of soft grass covered with the buffalo robe. "Your ankle needs rest," he said. "Tomorrow we will reach my people, but tonight you must sleep well." The storm that came was violent, with lightning splitting the sky and thunder shaking the earth. Elizabeth huddled in the shelter, trying not to jump at each crash. Joseph sat at the entrance as always, but this time the space felt smaller, more intimate. "Are you afraid of storms?" he asked, noticing her tension. "Not usually," Elizabeth admitted. "But out here, with no walls, no roof, everything feels so much bigger, more dangerous." "This is truth, not fear," Joseph said, In towns, whites build walls and think they control nature, but nature is always stronger. Better to respect its power. Learn to bend like grass in wind rather than stand rigid like tree that breaks. A particularly loud thunderclap made Elizabeth gasp. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding Joseph's in the darkness. He went very still, but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, starting to withdraw. "No," he said softly, his fingers closing gently around hers. "Fear is nothing to shame, and comfort freely given is gift, not burden." They sat that way for a time, hands linked in the darkness while the storm raged outside. Elizabeth felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers, the steady pulse in his wrist. Such a simple touch, yet it grounded her more than any walls ever had. "Joseph," she said quietly, "what will happen when we reach your people? Will they accept your decision to protect me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Some will question, some will test. But I am warrior of standing. My word carries weight, and the grandmothers, they see deep. If your heart is true, they will know. And if they don't accept me, then I will take you elsewhere," he said simply. "My vow does not depend on others' approval, but I feel in my spirit that you belong with us, that the path leads forward, not back." The storm began to ease, thunder rumbling away across the prairie. Joseph squeezed her hand once, then gently released it. "Sleep now. Tomorrow brings new challenges, but also new hope." Elizabeth settled back on the buffalo robe, her ankle throbbing less thanks to his careful tending. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought about how much had changed in just a few days. She'd learned to read the sky for weather, to find direction by stars, to move silent as shadow when needed. But more than that, she'd learned that protection didn't have to mean possession, that strength came in many forms, that trust could grow in the space between two people who chose to see each other clearly. "Joseph?" she called softly. "Yes?" "Thank you, not just for protecting me, but for teaching me, for seeing me as someone worth teaching." In the darkness, she heard what might have been a smile in his voice. "You teach me too, Elizabeth. Your courage, your trust, your willingness to leave all behind for freedom. These are lessons I will not forget." The rain pattered gently on their shelter, and Elizabeth closed her eyes, feeling safer in this fragile construction of branches and hide than she'd ever felt in her father's solid house. Tomorrow she would face Joseph's people, would discover if her new life could truly begin. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be, protected but not caged, cared for but not owned, seen but not possessed. The prairie sang its night songs around them, and Elizabeth slept, dreaming of buffalo and endless skies and the steady presence of a warrior who'd sworn to guard her journey into an unknown future. The afternoon sun hung low and Joseph pointed to a column of smoke rising in the distance. "My people," he said quietly. "We are close now." Elizabeth's stomach tightened with apprehension. Her ankle had healed enough to ride properly again, but now she almost wished for more time before facing this next challenge. Joseph seemed to sense her fear. "Remember," he said, "you are under my protection. This is known and will be respected." They had barely crested the final ridge when Elizabeth heard the thunder of hoofbeats. 3 riders appeared as if from nowhere, young Lakota warriors with faces painted in bold stripes of red and black. They surrounded Joseph and Elizabeth in seconds, horses dancing with restless energy. The warriors spoke rapidly in Lakota, their voices sharp with challenge. Elizabeth caught Joseph's name several times, but little else. Joseph responded calmly, his voice carrying authority despite his youth. He gestured to Elizabeth, and she heard him speak what sounded like formal phrases, declarations of some kind. One of the warriors, broader than the others with a scar across his chin, urged his horse closer to Elizabeth. He stared at her with undisguised hostility, then spat words that needed no translation to convey their contempt. Joseph's entire demeanor changed. His hand moved to his knife, and he spoke in a low, dangerous tone that made even the other warriors shift uneasily. The scarred warrior's face darkened, but he backed his horse away. "What did he say?" Elizabeth asked quietly. Nothing worth repeating. Joseph replied, his jaw tight. Some hearts are closed to anything different, but he knows now that insulting you means challenging me. They rode into the Lakota camp as the sun touched the horizon, painting the tipis gold and crimson. Elizabeth had expected chaos, but what she found was order lodges arranged in a careful circle, cook fires tended by women in beautifully decorated dresses, children playing with dogs between the dwellings. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People emerged from teepees to stare at the white woman riding with Joseph standing elk. For this, she learned, was his full name among his people. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, a few outright hostility. Joseph dismounted first, then helped Elizabeth down, steadying her when her weak ankle protested. He kept one hand on her elbow as he led her through the gathering crowd, his presence a clear statement of protection. An elderly woman approached, her face mapped with wrinkles but her dark eyes sharp as flint. She wore a dress decorated with intricate beadwork and porcupine quills, marking her as someone of importance. Joseph spoke to her respectfully in Lakota, gesturing to Elizabeth. The old woman, a grandmother, Elizabeth realized. One of the matriarchs Joseph had mentioned circled Elizabeth slowly, studying her from every angle. She reached out suddenly, fingering Elizabeth's torn dress, touching the sunburn on her cheeks, noting the blisters on her hands. "You run far," the grandmother said in accented English. "From what?" Elizabeth met those ancient eyes steadily. "From men who would own me, from a life that would cage me." The grandmother made a thoughtful sound. "And you run to us? Whites fear the Lakota. I fear chains more than I fear difference." Elizabeth replied honestly. Something that might have been approval flickered in the old woman's eyes. She spoke to Joseph in Lakota, then walked away without another word to Elizabeth. "What did she say?" Elizabeth asked. "She will think on it." Joseph replied, "Grandmother White Crow's word carries great weight. For now, you stay in my family's lodge." He led her to a teepee near the center of the camp. Inside, the space was larger than Elizabeth expected, with a fire pit in the center and beds of furs arranged around the edges. An older woman sat working on beadwork, Joseph's mother, Elizabeth realized from the resemblance. The woman looked up, her face showing neither welcome nor rejection. Joseph spoke at length in Lakota, clearly explaining the situation. His mother's gaze moved between her son and Elizabeth, weighing, measuring. Finally, she spoke in careful English. "I am Mary Standing Elk. You are welcome in my lodge." The words were formal, but Elizabeth sensed no real warmth behind them. Still, it wasn't rejection. That night, Elizabeth lay on a bed of soft furs, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp horses nickering, dogs barking, voices calling in Lakota, drums beating somewhere in the distance. Joseph had left to speak with the tribal council about her presence, and his absence made her feel vulnerable despite his mother's polite hospitality. She must have dozed, because she woke to raised voices outside the lodge. Joseph's voice, angry and defiant, answered by another man's, equally heated. Elizabeth couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Argument, challenge, threat. The confrontation continued for several minutes before footsteps stormed away. The lodge flap lifted, and Joseph entered, tension radiating from every line of his body. "What happened?" Elizabeth asked softly. He crouched beside her, keeping his voice low to avoid waking his mother. "Red Thunder challenges my right to bring you here. He says white women bring nothing but trouble, that protecting you weakens the tribe." "The man with the scar?" "Yeah, he has supporters, especially among the younger warriors who have lost family to white soldiers." Joseph's expression was grim. "He demands council judgment tomorrow." Elizabeth's heart sank. "Maybe I should leave. I don't want to cause division in your tribe." "No." The word was sharp. "Final. Running solves nothing, and my honor is now tied to yours. To abandon you would shame me and my family." His voice softened slightly. "Besides, not all oppose you. Some remember whites who showed kindness, traded fairly. They will speak for giving you chance." The next morning, Elizabeth was summoned before the tribal council. The gathering took place in the center of the camp, with elders seated in a circle and the rest of the tribe forming a larger ring around them. Joseph stood beside her, translating when needed. Red Thunder spoke first, his words passionate and accusatory. Even without translation, Elizabeth could feel the pain behind his anger, losses suffered, betrayals endured. He pointed at her repeatedly, his message clear. She represented the enemy. Regardless of her personal circumstances, others spoke as well. Some supported Red Thunder, their faces hard with remembered grief. But others, including Grandmother White Crow, spoke what seemed to be words of caution and consideration. Then an unexpected voice rose, a young woman, perhaps Elizabeth's age, with a baby on her hip. She spoke softly but firmly, gesturing to Elizabeth and then to her child. When she finished, several women murmured what sounded like agreement. "What did she say?" Elizabeth whispered to Joseph. "Small Dove says she was forced to marry at 15 to a man she did not choose. She says all women understand the fear of being property. She asks if we turn away a woman seeking freedom. How are we different from those we fight?" Finally, the chief, a dignified man with silver threading his braids, called for silence. He spoke directly to Elizabeth, and Joseph translated. "He asks what you offer our people. Why should we risk white anger by sheltering you?" Elizabeth stood straighter, drawing on inner strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I offer willing hands to work, a heart grateful for sanctuary. I can read and write. I could teach your children letters and numbers if you wish, to better deal with white traders. I know healing herbs from my mother's teaching. I ask only for the chance to prove myself worthy of your protection." The chief considered this, then asked another question through Joseph. "And if white men come seeking you, if soldiers arrive demanding we surrender you, then I will go," Elizabeth said firmly. "I won't bring violence to those who shelter me. But until that day, if it comes, I pledge to live as one of you, to follow your ways, to contribute what I can." Red Thunder interrupted with a harsh question. Joseph's face tightened, but he translated. "He asks if you would marry a Lakota man if the grandmothers arranged it, if you would bear mixed-blood children." Heat flooded Elizabeth's face, but she kept her voice steady. "I fled a forced marriage. I hope your people would not impose another, but if I ever marry again, it will be for love and respect, not blood or color." Grandmother White Crow cackled at this, saying something that made several others laugh. Even the chief's stern expression softened slightly. "She says you have spine," Joseph murmured. "This is good." The council deliberated while the tribe waited. Elizabeth stood beside Joseph, drawing strength from his steady presence. Whatever happened, she realized, she would not regret the choice that had brought her here. Even these few days of freedom had been worth any price. Finally, the chief stood. His words rang across the camp, formal and decisive. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some nodding approval, others, including Red Thunder, turning away in disgust. "What did he say?" Elizabeth asked anxiously. Joseph's expression revealed relief. "You may stay, but on conditions. You must learn our language, our customs. You must contribute to the tribe's welfare, and you must accept that some will never trust you. Can you live with this?" "Yes," Elizabeth said without hesitation. "Yes, I can." As the crowd dispersed, Red Thunder passed close to them. He said something to Joseph in a low, threatening tone, then stalked away. "He says this is not over," Joseph translated reluctantly. "That I have brought danger to our people for the sake of a white woman's pretty face." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth began, but Joseph cut her off with a gesture. "No. His anger comes from pain, but it does not make him right. Change is hard, but sometimes necessary. You are here because the spirits guided our paths together. This I believe." That evening, as Elizabeth helped Joseph's mother prepare the evening meal, her first lesson in Lakota ways, she reflected on the day's events. She'd faced judgment and survived, found unexpected allies and confirmed enemies. The road ahead would be difficult. She knew, learning a new language, new customs, proving herself daily to those who doubted. But as she watched Joseph across the fire, saw the quiet pride in his eyes when he looked at her, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. The beginning of belonging. Not the false belonging of ownership that Garrett had offered, but something earned through courage and choice. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched her desperate flight across the prairie. Now they witnessed a different scene, a white woman learning to tend a Lakota fire, protected not by walls or laws, but by the honor of a warrior who'd sworn to guard her journey into a new life. Red thunder might threaten, others might doubt, but Elizabeth had found her sanctuary. Now she just had to prove herself worthy of it, one day at a time. The storm came without warning on a night when the moon hid behind thick clouds. Elizabeth woke to the sound of thunder and the harsh patter of rain against the buffalo hide walls of the teepee. The wind howled like a living thing, making the lodge poles creak and sway. Joseph's mother had gone to tend to a sick child in another lodge, leaving Elizabeth alone. She sat up in the darkness, pulling the fur blanket closer around her shoulders. After 2 weeks among the Lakota, she'd grown accustomed to the night sounds of the camp, but this storm felt different, wilder, more violent. A particularly fierce gust of wind made the whole structure shudder. Elizabeth's heart raced as she remembered the flimsy lean-to that had sheltered her during her first storm with Joseph. At least the teepee was stronger, built to withstand prairie weather. Still, she found herself wishing she wasn't alone. The lodge flap suddenly lifted, and Joseph appeared, water streaming from his hair and clothes. He'd been standing watch, she realized, protecting the horse herd from potentially stampeding in the storm. "Are you well?" he asked, securing the entrance against the wind. "Yes, just—" A massive thunderclap cut off her words, making her flinch. "Just startled by the storm." In the dim light from the banked fire, she saw him frown with concern. "This storm is stronger than expected. I should stay until it passes. To be sure the lodge holds." He moved to the far side of the fire, maintaining the careful distance he always kept between them. But as he wrung water from his hair, Elizabeth noticed him shiver. "You're soaked through," she said. "You'll catch your death sitting in wet clothes." "I have endured worse," he replied, but his voice carried a slight tremor. "Don't be stubborn," Elizabeth said, finding courage in concern for him. "There are blankets here. At least dry yourself and warm up." Joseph hesitated, that eternal, careful propriety warring with practical need. Another shiver decided him. He pulled off his soaked shirt, hanging it near the fire, then wrapped a blanket around himself, still keeping to his side of the lodge. The storm intensified, rain drumming so hard it sounded like horses galloping across the hide walls. Lightning illuminated the interior in brief, stark flashes. During one such moment, Elizabeth saw Joseph's face clearly, the strong planes and angles, the wet hair clinging to his neck, the way his dark eyes watched the lodge poles with concern. "Will it hold?" she asked. "Yes. My mother builds well." He fed a few sticks to the fire, coaxing more warmth from the flames. "But storms like this, they remind us how small we are." "I used to love storms," Elizabeth said softly. "Back in Boston, I'd sit by my window and watch the rain on the cobblestones, feeling safe behind glass and walls. But out here, storms show truth." Joseph finished, no hiding from nature's power. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind's fury. Elizabeth found herself studying Joseph in the firelight, noting things she'd tried not to notice before, the graceful strength in his movements, the way his hands gestured when he spoke, the quiet intensity of his presence. "May I ask you something?" she said suddenly. He nodded. "Why haven't you married? A warrior of your standing must have had many offers." Joseph was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I waited for the right feeling. My mother says I am too particular, but I watched my parents. They chose each other against all opposition, a French trader and a Lakota woman. Their love was like the sacred fire, constant and warm. I wanted nothing less. And you never found it. Perhaps I was not ready to see it when it appeared, he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. The weight of that look made Elizabeth's breath catch. She dropped her gaze, heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the flames. I should tell you something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About why I ran, about what Garrett wanted from me. You owe me no explanations. Please. She looked up at him. I need someone to understand, to know why I was so desperate. Joseph nodded, waiting patiently. Elizabeth drew a shaky breath. My mother raised me to believe that the wedding night should be sacred, that a woman's innocence was a gift for the man she truly loved. Old-fashioned, perhaps, but I held to it when Father promised me to Garrett. I thought, I hoped that even if I couldn't love him, at least there might be respect, gentleness. Her voice grew bitter. But Garrett saw me as property to be claimed. He told me exactly what he planned for our wedding night, in crude detail, how he would enjoy breaking me, teaching me my place. He said my innocence made me more valuable, like an unbroken mare that would be more satisfying to master. Joseph's hands clenched into fists, his expression darkening with anger. That's why I ran, Elizabeth continued, tears threatening, not just from marriage, but from being treated as a thing to be conquered. I know some would say I was foolish, that wives must submit to husbands, but I couldn't. I couldn't give myself to someone who saw me that way. You were not foolish, Joseph said firmly. You were brave. To choose unknown danger over certain cruelty takes great courage. But now I'm here, still unmarried, still... She trailed off, embarrassed by what she was revealing. Still pure, Joseph finished gently. And this troubles you? Doesn't it make me seem like a child, a naive girl who knows nothing of the world? Joseph moved then, just slightly, closing some of the distance between them while still maintaining propriety. Among my people, a woman's choice to share herself is sacred. It is not about innocence or experience, but about the freedom to choose. You protected that freedom. This makes you strong, not childish. The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. Wind slammed into the tipi with such force that one of the stakes pulled free. The wall began to buckle inward. Joseph moved instantly, bracing his shoulder against the collapsing section. The stake, he shouted over the wind. You must reset it. Elizabeth didn't think, just acted. She plunged out into the storm, immediately drenched by the horizontal rain. In the lightning flashes, she found the pulled stake and fought to drive it back into the muddy ground. The wind tried to tear it from her hands, but she held on desperately. Deeper, Joseph called from inside. Hit it with the stone there. Elizabeth grabbed a large rock and pounded the stake deeper, mud splashing with each strike. Her hand slipped on the wet stone, nails breaking, but she kept hammering until the stake held firm. She stumbled back inside, gasping and shaking. Joseph quickly secured the entrance again, then turned to her with concern. Your hands, he said, taking them gently in his to examine the damage. Several nails were torn and bleeding, the palms scraped raw. It's nothing, Elizabeth said through chattering teeth. It is not nothing. His voice was rough with emotion. You could have let the wall collapse, stayed safe inside, but you risked yourself to save my mother's lodge. He retrieved water and clean cloth, then knelt before her to tend her injured hands. His touch was infinitely gentle as he cleaned the wounds, his head bent in concentration. Elizabeth found herself studying the fall of his wet hair, the careful way he held her hands. There, he said softly, wrapping the last bandage. But he didn't release her hands immediately. Instead, he looked up at her, and Elizabeth saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. Elizabeth, he said, her name a question and a prayer. I'm a virgin, she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of vulnerability and trust. Go slow, please. I need patience, understanding. I need to know that I'm more than just a body to be claimed. Joseph's hands tightened gently on hers. You are so much more, he said, voice thick with emotion. You are courage and kindness. You are the woman who tends my mother's fire, who learns our words, who faced down the council without flinching. You are the one who trusts me with her fears in the darkness." He lifted one of her bandaged hands to his lips, pressing the softest kiss to her palm. "I vow to you, not as Lakota to white, not as man to woman, but as Joseph to Elizabeth. I will guard your heart as fiercely as I guard your body. Your trust is sacred to me." Tears spilled down Elizabeth's cheeks, mixing with the rain still dripping from her hair. "I believe you," she whispered. "I don't know why, but I do." The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the teepee, a different kind of intensity filled the space. Joseph released her hands and moved back to his side of the fire, but the distance felt different now. Not rejection, but respect. Not coldness, but careful honor. "When this storm passes," Joseph said quietly, "things will be different between us." "I know," Elizabeth replied. "I'm not afraid, nor am I." He said, "For the first time in my life, I am not afraid of what comes next." They sat through the rest of the storm in silence, but it was a silence full of promise. Elizabeth's hands throbbed from her injuries, but she hardly noticed. She had spoken her deepest secret, her greatest vulnerability, and Joseph had received it like the sacred trust it was. When dawn finally came, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Joseph's mother returned to find them sitting respectfully apart, but something in her sharp eyes suggested she sensed the shift between them. As Joseph prepared to leave, he paused at the lodge entrance. "Your hands will heal quickly," he said. "But what you gave me last night, your trust, I will guard forever." After he left, Elizabeth sat by the renewed fire, cradling her bandaged hands. She had revealed everything, her innocence, her fears, her need for patience and care. And Joseph had promised to honor it all. For the first time since fleeing Cedar Ridge, Elizabeth felt truly safe. Not just protected from physical harm, but safe in the knowledge that her heart, her body, her choices were respected. The storm had tested more than the teepee's strength. It had tested their growing bond. And like the lodge that stood firm against the wind, their connection had not only survived, but grown stronger. Whatever came next, Elizabeth knew she would face it with Joseph beside her, guardian not just of her body but of her trust, her heart, and the sacred choice that remained hers alone to give. The warning came from a scout at midday, riders approaching from the east, too many to count in the dust they raised. Elizabeth was helping Joseph's mother prepare buffalo hides when the cry went up through the camp. Warriors grabbed weapons, women gathered children, and an electric tension filled the air. Joseph appeared at Elizabeth's side immediately, his face grim. "Stay close to my mother. If fighting starts, run for the river canyon." "You know the hiding place I showed you?" "Yes, but promise me." His hand gripped her shoulder. "Whatever happens, you run." Before she could respond, he was gone, joining the other warriors, forming a defensive line at the camp's edge. Elizabeth's heart hammered as she helped Mary Standing Elk gather the most vulnerable elders and children into the center of the camp. Red Thunder passed by, his face painted for war. He cast Elizabeth a look of pure venom. "See what you bring to us, white woman? Your people come to destroy us because of you." "We don't know that," Mary said sharply. "It could be soldiers, could be hunters, could be nothing to do with her." But Elizabeth's stomach churned with dread. What if Red Thunder was right? What if Garrett had somehow tracked her here? The riders crested the hill, and Elizabeth's worst fears materialized. At the head of the group rode Samuel Garrett himself, flanked by hired guns and what looked like a cavalry detachment. Her knees nearly buckled at the sight. Chief Walking Bear rode out to meet them, Joseph and several other warriors beside him. The parley took place in the space between the camp and the approaching riders. Voices carrying on the wind, but words indistinct. "What are they saying?" Elizabeth asked desperately. Small Dove, the young woman who had spoken for her at the council, translated in halting English. "The white chief says they track a stolen woman, says she was taken by Indians, demands to search camp. Elizabeth's hands clenched. Stolen, as if she were a horse or a saddle. The conversation grew heated. She saw Garrett pointing aggressively. Joseph stepping forward in response. The soldiers looked uneasy, clearly not eager for conflict, but bound by some order or agreement. Then Garrett's voice rose loud enough to hear clearly. "I know she's here. I'll burn every teepee if I have to." Chief Walking Bear's response was calm but firm. The cavalry officers seemed to be arguing with Garrett, gesturing for calm, but Garrett was beyond reason. His face red with rage and weeks of fruitless searching. Suddenly, he drew his pistol. Everything happened at once. Warriors raised bows and rifles. Soldiers shouted orders. Horses danced nervously. The camp behind Elizabeth erupted in cries of alarm. "Enough!" Elizabeth heard her own voice ring out as she pushed through the crowd. She couldn't let violence erupt because of her. Too many innocents would suffer. "Elizabeth, no!" Mary tried to stop her, but Elizabeth pulled free. She walked steadily toward the confrontation, aware of every eye upon her. Joseph turned, his face a mask of controlled fury. He moved to intercept her, but she held up a hand. "This is my choice," she said firmly. "I won't have blood spilled for me." She faced Garrett across the divide. Chin raised despite her terror. He looked different. Gaunt, unshaven. His clothes dusty from hard travel. Obsession had marked him. "There you are," he breathed. "My runaway bride." "I was never your bride," Elizabeth said clearly. "I never consented. The money you paid my father, consider it the cost of your education in treating women as property." Garrett's face purpled. "You belong to me. I paid for you fair and square." "You paid for nothing but your own delusions." Elizabeth's voice grew stronger. "I am not cattle to be bought. I am not land to be claimed. I am a free woman, and I choose to stay here." "With these savages?" Garrett spat. "You'd rather bed down with heathens than fulfill your duty as a white woman?" Joseph made a sound like a growl, but Elizabeth touched his arm gently, stilling him. "I found more honor and humanity here in a month than I saw in years among so-called civilized men." The cavalry officer, a weathered man with captain's bars, cleared his throat. "Miss, are you here of your own free will? Have these Indians harmed or coerced you?" "I am here by choice, Captain," Elizabeth said firmly. "I've been shown nothing but kindness and respect. I was fleeing forced marriage when Joseph Standing Elk saved my life on the prairie. He and his people offered me sanctuary." "Lies," Garrett snarled. "She's been corrupted, brainwashed. I demand you return her to proper society." "I'm afraid I can't do that," the captain said slowly. "If the lady says she's here willingly and shows no signs of harm, I have no authority to remove her. I hired you to—" "You hired guides and protection for a search party." The captain interrupted. "Not to wage war on peaceful Indians or kidnap unwilling women." He turned to Chief Walking Bear. "My apologies for the disturbance. We'll be leaving." "This isn't over." Garrett's hand tightened on his pistol. "If the law won't help me reclaim my property, I'll do it myself." He raised the weapon, pointing it directly at Elizabeth. Time seemed to slow. She heard shouts, saw Joseph moving to shield her, registered the captain reaching for his own sidearm. But Red Thunder was faster. The warrior who had opposed Elizabeth from the beginning launched himself from his horse, tackling Garrett to the ground. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the air as they rolled in the dust. Fighting for control of the weapon, other men rushed to separate them. Red Thunder came up bloodied but victorious. Garrett's pistol in his hand, he tossed it aside with contempt. "No one threatens those under Lakota protection," Red Thunder declared, his English rough but clear. "Not even worthless white women." It was a backhanded defense, but a defense nonetheless. Elizabeth met his eyes, seeing something shift in his hostile gaze. Not friendship, perhaps never that, but a grudging acceptance of her place in the tribe. The captain and his men had Garrett restrained now, the rancher still cursing and threatening. "You'll pay for this," he screamed at Elizabeth. "All of you will pay. I'll bring an army back here. I'll see you all hang." "No," the captain said wearily. "You won't. In fact, Mr. Garrett, You're under arrest for attempted murder, disturbing the peace, and inciting violence. We'll be taking you back to Fort Lincoln for trial." As the soldiers bound Garrett's hands, Joseph stepped close to Elizabeth. "You were foolish to expose yourself," he said quietly, "but also brave." "I couldn't let others fight my battles," she replied. "Not when I could end it with truth." Chief Walking Bear approached them. "You spoke well," he told Elizabeth. "Showed courage, and Red Thunder defended you. Perhaps you truly belong here after all." As the soldiers prepared to leave with their prisoner, Garrett managed one last venomous look at Elizabeth. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You're mine. You'll always be mine." "No," Elizabeth said with quiet certainty. "I belong to no one but myself." The cavalry troop departed. Garrett bound and gagged to stop his threats. The dust of their leaving slowly settled, and the camp began to return to normal. But Elizabeth stood frozen, the magnitude of what had happened washing over her. She had faced her demon and won. Garrett was gone. Arrested, no longer a threat. She was truly free. Her knees buckled, and Joseph caught her, supporting her weight. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe now." "Am I?" Elizabeth looked up at him. "He'll be released eventually. He has money, influence, and you have the Lakota." Joseph said firmly, "You have me. We protect our own." Red Thunder approached, his face still bloody from the fight. He studied Elizabeth for a long moment, then spoke in Lakota. Joseph translated, surprise coloring his voice. He says he was wrong about you, that you showed warrior spirit today, that anyone who stands unflinching before an enemy's gun has earned respect." Red Thunder added something else, then walked away without waiting for response. "What did he say?" Elizabeth asked. Joseph's lips quirked in an almost smile. "He said you may be a foolish white woman, but you are our foolish white woman now." Coming from Red Thunder, that is high praise. That evening, the camp celebrated, not for violence avoided, but for community defended. Elizabeth found herself truly included for the first time, women teaching her celebration songs, children bringing her food, warriors nodding respectfully as she passed. "You did more than face Garrett today," Grandmother White Crow told her. "You chose us over them. In front of all, this matters." As the fire burned low and the celebration wound down, Joseph walked Elizabeth to the edge of camp where they could see the stars. The same stars she'd fled under, now witnesses to her freedom. "I was terrified today," she admitted. "When I saw him again, heard his voice, part of me wanted to run." "But you didn't." "No, because I realized something." She turned to face him. "I'm not running from anymore. I'm moving toward a life I choose, people I care about." She paused, gathering courage. "Toward you." Joseph's hand found hers in the darkness. "And I toward you," he said softly. "When Garrett pointed that gun, when I thought I might lose you before I could tell you." "Tell me what?" He turned her to face him fully, his free hand rising to cup her cheek gently. "That my heart has been yours since I found you in that ravine, that protecting you began as duty but became privilege. That when you whispered your trust to me in the storm, you gave me the greatest gift I have ever received." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "Joseph, I know you need time," he said quickly. "I know trust must be built slowly. I do not ask for what you are not ready to give. I ask only to court you properly, to prove myself worthy of the precious gift of yourself." "Yes," Elizabeth breathed. "Oh, yes." Standing there under the vast prairie sky, with her demons vanquished and her chosen family around her, Elizabeth felt the last chains of her old life break away. She was no longer Elizabeth the runaway, Elizabeth the property, Elizabeth the virgin bride to be sold. She was Elizabeth of the Lakota, protected and protector, choosing and chosen. And in Joseph's gentle hands, she placed not just her trust, but her hope for a future written in their own terms. The night wind carried away the last echoes of Garrett's threats. leaving only the sound of their joined breathing and the steady beat of two hearts learning to beat as one. Dawn broke golden across the prairie, painting the grasslands in shades of amber and rose. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the camp, watching the sun climb above the horizon. 6 months had passed since Garrett's arrest. 6 months of learning, growing, becoming. Her hands, once soft and pale, now showed the calluses of useful work. Her blonde hair, braided in Lakota fashion, gleamed with bear grease and health. The doe-skin dress she wore, decorated with beadwork she'd sewn herself, felt more natural than any corset ever had. "You rise early." Joseph's voice came from behind her. She turned, smiling at the sight of him. The morning light caught the silver ornaments in his hair, the new shirt she'd made him fitting perfectly across his broad shoulders. Their courtship had been slow, respectful, but deep as the prairie rivers, a gradual building of trust, affection, and something that felt like coming home. "I wanted to watch the sunrise," she said. "To remember." "Remember what?" "Everything. The fear I felt that first morning after leaving Cedar Ridge, the desperation, and then," she gestured at the peaceful camp stirring to life. "This, who could have imagined?" Joseph moved to stand beside her, maintaining a proper distance but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "The spirits knew. They always know." Over the past months, Elizabeth had found her place in the tribe. She taught the children English letters and numbers, preparing them for the changing world they would have to navigate. In return, the grandmothers taught her the skills of survival, how to tan hides until they were soft as silk, which plants healed and which harmed, the intricate beadwork that told stories without words. Even Red Thunder had become, if not a friend, at least a respectful ally. His wife was pregnant with their first child, and Elizabeth had used her mother's knowledge of healing herbs to ease her morning sickness. The warrior had gruffly thanked her, the closest to an apology she would ever receive. "Joseph," she said softly, "I've been thinking about what Grandmother White Crow said yesterday." He tensed slightly. The elder had spoken of marriages, of the importance of new blood in the tribe, of how Elizabeth had proven herself worthy of a warrior's protection and affection. "She speaks from wisdom," Joseph said carefully, "but also from impatience. She knows my heart, knows where it leads, and wishes to see things settled." "And where does your heart lead?" Elizabeth asked, though she knew the answer. Joseph turned to face her fully. In the growing light, his face showed all the strength and gentleness she'd come to treasure. "My heart has been yours since you trusted me with your fears in the storm. But Elizabeth, I would not have you feel pressured. You fled one forced marriage. I will not become another cage. What if I don't want to flee?" Elizabeth stepped closer, her hand finding his. "What if I want to run toward instead of away?" His fingers tightened around hers. "Then I would ask you properly, with the sunrise as witness." He took a breath, switching to the formal words he'd been teaching her in Lakota. Then, translating, "Elizabeth who chooses freedom, I offer you my heart, my protection, my life. Will you walk the marriage path with me?" Elizabeth felt tears slip down her cheeks, not of sadness or fear, but of pure joy. Joseph Standing Elk, "I accept your heart and offer mine in return. Yes, I will walk with you." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her with infinite tenderness. Elizabeth pressed her face against his chest, hearing the thunder of his heartbeat, feeling safer than stone walls had ever made her feel. "There is something I must tell you," she whispered against his shirt. "Something you should know before we speak to the elders about marriage." He pulled back slightly to see her face. "You can tell me anything. I'm still—" She took a breath. "What I told you in the storm remains true. I've never been with a man, and I need you to know that this frightens me a little. Not because of you, but because of what I was taught to fear." Joseph's hand rose to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Elizabeth, my heart. This changes nothing except to make me more determined to be worthy of your trust. Among my people, the wedding night is not about conquering but about joining. two spirits becoming one. We will go as slow as you need, learn together, with honor and patience. You don't think less of me for being inexperienced at my age? Think less? Joseph's voice held wonder. You protected your right to choose through danger and hardship. You offer me a gift that no one has taken or claimed. How could I think less of you for that? The camp was fully awake now. Cook fires sending smoke spiraling into the morning sky. Children's laughter mixed with dogs barking and horses nickering. It was a sound Elizabeth had come to love. The music of community, of belonging. When? She asked softly. When you're ready. Tomorrow or next season or next year. I have waited my whole life for you. I can wait longer if needed. Elizabeth thought of her mother's words about saving herself for true love, about the sacred nature of choice. She thought of Garrett's crude threats, his view of her as property to break, and she thought of Joseph, who had protected not just her body but her right to decide, who offered his heart with open hands rather than grasping fists. Next moon, she said firmly. When the prairie flowers bloom, I want to marry you in a field of wildflowers, with the whole tribe as witness. Joseph's smile was like sunrise itself. Then next moon it shall be. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Mary Standing Elk embraced Elizabeth fully as a daughter, teaching her the sacred traditions of Lakota marriage. Small Dove and the other young women giggled and shared wisdom about marriage, their frank talk making Elizabeth blush but also easing her fears. Even Grandmother White Crow seemed satisfied, presenting Elizabeth with a wedding dress that had been her own decades before, white doeskin soft as butter, decorated with generations of careful beadwork. You earn this, the elder said simply. Not by blood, but by choice. Wear it well. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. The whole tribe traveled to a meadow blazing with spring flowers, purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, prairie roses. Elizabeth rode on a horse Joseph had given her, the wedding dress making her feel like she was floating. The ceremony blended traditions. Chief Walking Bear spoke the Lakota blessings, joining their hands with a braided rope of sweetgrass. But Joseph had also found a traveling missionary to speak Christian words, honoring Elizabeth's upbringing. Do you, Elizabeth, take this man freely, without reservation or force? The missionary asked. I do, Elizabeth said, her voice ringing clear across the meadow. Freely and gladly. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the tribe celebrated with dancing and feasting. Elizabeth found a quiet moment to slip away, standing at the meadow's edge to catch her breath. She thought of her journey, from the terrified girl fleeing Cedar Ridge to the woman standing here in wedding clothes, surrounded by chosen family. The prairie that had once seemed so hostile now felt like home. Joseph found her there, as she knew he would. No regrets? He asked softly. None, Elizabeth said firmly. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I choose to be. As night fell and the celebration continued, Joseph led Elizabeth to their new lodge, one they had built together, combining Lakota tradition with small touches of her Eastern heritage. Inside, buffalo robes made a soft bed, and a small fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. Are you afraid? Joseph asked gently. A little, Elizabeth admitted, but not of you, never of you. Then we go slow. He said simply, tonight and always, your trust is still the most precious gift you give me. And they did go slow, with patience and tenderness, with whispered words and gentle touches. Elizabeth discovered that what Garrett would have taken by force, Joseph treated as sacred. What had been a source of fear became instead a gradual blooming of trust, intimacy, and joy. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the buffalo robes, Elizabeth traced the scars on Joseph's back, marks of battles survived, of strength tested. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me, not as property or prize, but as myself, for giving me the freedom to choose you. Joseph pressed a kiss to her forehead. And thank you for choosing to trust a Lakota warrior with your precious heart. Outside, the prairie night sang its ancient songs, Coyotes calling, wind through grass, the distant sound of drums as the celebration continued. But inside the lodge, there was only warmth and safety, and the quiet breathing of two souls who had found their way to each other across impossible odds. Elizabeth smiled in the darkness, her hand over Joseph's heart. She had run from a cage and found freedom. She had fled ownership and discovered partnership. She had protected her right to choose and found something worth choosing. The girl who had whispered "go slow" in fear had become a woman who could set the pace of her own life, protected not by walls or laws, but by love freely given and received, as sleep claimed them. Elizabeth's last thought was of her mother, who had told her to save herself for true love. She had done more than that. She had saved herself for true freedom, and found love waiting there to greet her. The stars wheeled overhead, witnessing this new chapter in an old story, the tale of a woman who chose her own path and a warrior who honored that choice, building a life together on the endless prairie, where the horizon stretched forever and every dawn brought new possibilities. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Dear listeners, where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let us know. We'd love to connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Elizabeth and Joseph's journey. Your comments inspire us to bring you more authentic stories from the American frontier.